Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Jnanavardhini. As you would have noticed, we had scheduled another session today, but unfortunately, we had to reschedule it. And Naavi sir was gracious enough to step in, and we get yet another opportunity to listen to an educative session from. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, friends. Um, for some time, we have been discussing the compliance implementation, how can a company can plan implementation of a privacy program. So I was just looking back at what I have been trying to do. In fact, some time back, I had looked at HIPAA, and at that time, I used to use an approach. I used to call it as the theory of highest motivation. That is, how do we make the workforce people accept the need for a particular security culture and implement it? Because after all, though the management may decide to do something, consultant may draft so many policies, and we also try to take an assurance that the policies have been adopted and we issue our certificate of compliance or something like that. We all know that ultimately, unless every person who has a stake in compliance is willing to cooperate in the exercise, no program will be successful. So I have been always looking at how do we motivate the workforce for compliance. Now, one way of looking at privacy is as data protection compliance. If you look at our PDP CMS program, PDP CMS does not stop at only data protection, CIA or something like that. It goes much beyond that because we talk of data valuation, we talk of distributed responsibility, something like that. The idea is that to be effective in, protecting the data, we need to have a larger governance system which supports the protection. You can always say data protection is a subset of data governance. And in fact, when the Chris Gopalakrishna committee gave its report and initiated a thought process that data can be exchanged for consideration, and therefore every company needs to look at data governance as one part of its business vertical, and of which, of course, data protection is always a part. So I have been looking at how do we motivate the employees of an organization to be compliant with a particular data protection compliance requirement. We also sometimes address the same issue by saying that we have to develop a privacy culture in the organization. Both are same, only thing is we address it differently. So in that process, I used to use a model which I used to call as a Pentagon model with 5 different things. And in motivation, those of you who have studied motivation as a part of the interpersonal skills or leadership skills, you know that there was one theory of Dr. Maslow, which was called a hierarchical theory. That is, a person will be motivated in a sequential manner, that if he completes one motivation, next he can be motivated by the next level, like that. Like a new employee, if you don't pay him salary, he is not going to be motivated. So salary and basic needs are one, and then he will want some recognition, that kind of graduated development. And there will be always somebody who is at the top end. We call that as self-actualization level, where that person doesn't need any motivation. He is a self-motivated person. And of course, everybody would like to have them as employees, but it doesn't always happen. So there was what was called a hierarchical model. Now, when I tried to look at this Pentagon model, basically it was security. So I felt that it cannot work as a hierarchical model, that one after another, because you cannot say I will first do take care of the basic needs, and then we'll wait for 1 month, 2 months, something like that, then go to the next kind of a thing. So I see that the 5 requirements which I had identified as the 5 parameters of the, or 5 walls of the Pentagon, they should actually closely fit to each other so that there is no leakage between anything. So all the 5 has to be present at any point of time for the information security implementation to work. This was the concept. Now, in the data protection area, I'm trying to use the same concept, but I felt the need to add one more element, and therefore it became a hexagonal model for digital governance implementation as a 6-step process to building a data protection culture in an organization. Of course, most of the concepts here are known to you, and you would also have applied it in different circumstances. I'm only trying to put it in one structure so that it becomes easy when we discuss it with, say, a client. Now, when you go to a data audit, where do we start is always a issue. So these 6 elements which I have considered are awareness, acceptance, role identification, tools, incentives, and sanctions. In this role identification is the new element which I have added to convert the old Pentagon model into the Hexagon model. I will try to give my thoughts on these things. At the end of it, let us discuss it and perhaps look at your views also. Now, when we look at awareness, awareness is something which every one of us is considering whenever we do any audit work or something like that. But normally when we say awareness, we say employee training. But awareness is much more than running one training class. I normally try to actually ideally look at awareness at 2 levels. One is before implementation, another is after implementation. Why I'm saying this before implementation is, say, whenever we take a techno-legal compliance with an organization, though most of the people in the organization say, I am aware of it, I am aware of it. If you start suggesting some controls, probably they will not appreciate why something is being suggested. So there is a need to create the base knowledge before they start listening to you. That is why in most of the cases, I try to start with an awareness exercise even before we start with the implementation. Sometimes I have now started calling it as a round table, because the top management professionals will not agree that they don't know they need an awareness. But you ask anybody, it used to happen in HIPAA, it will happen in the data protection area. People will say, I'm aware of it, but obviously they would not have studied in depth the data protection bill or the things surrounding that, but they would not admit it. And as a consultant, it becomes difficult unless we make them understand. That is why I said that before implementation, we need to undertake one awareness exercise. Now, this is required at both the top management level as well as at the workforce level. Why do we require it at the workforce level? Because at least when we say workforce at this level, I normally include the decision makers. So because it will be difficult to engage a company and say we need one training for all your workforce before and another for all your workforce after. They may think that it is over doing of things, cost and other things will be there. So normally I try to restrict this before implementation awareness to the top management along with the decision makers. The reason is that subsequently, if we go for interviewing these decision makers and try to make an assessment of gap, at that time, that particular, say, decision maker who may be in charge of a division, he should be able to understand what we are asking. The questions which we ask, most of the time, people will not understand it in the perspective in which we are trying to elicit, because they will have in their mind their own thing. Today, if you talk of the data protection, in their mind, they will only know about GDPR. Now, they will be giving all their answers from the GDPR angle, and which may not be suitable for us. So therefore, I always insist that the best results of even a gap assessment exercise, which could be based on your interview questionnaires, which these people, chosen people will fill up, is done by conducting a sort of a awareness training before even we start the implementation. So how do we structure it? We call it as a round table. We tell them that you know everything. Please let us know the context. We want to understand the context. Therefore, we want to have a discussion. That is a method by which perhaps you can get better involvement from them. Otherwise, the top management will either skip this kind of a meeting, or they will pose as if they know everything. And when it comes to filling up of the questionnaire, they will find it difficult, or most probably they will leave the questionnaire half blank and expect us to fill it up ourselves. That's a waste of time. So awareness has to happen even before we expect prompt answers from them for our gap assessment questions. Now, awareness after the implementation, again, both to the top management workforce, basically is because we would have by that time created policies, and in the policy we would have stated something, and even that policy documents need to be understood by the people. So therefore, it is better to have a clarificatory session post the implementation. That is why I say awareness can be considered as a continued training before and after. And normally this workforce training after the implementation, we as consultants leave it to the company to do it themselves, because again, it's a question of spending consultants' time and other things, and consultants feel that whatever they have received as payment is not sufficient even for one training. Then how do I conduct 4 trainings? But if we really are serious about the transfer of knowledge, and which ultimately leads to what we call as building of a culture. Building of a culture doesn't happen overnight. You may have a training program, everybody may sit there with a very serious face, they may even listen to you, but we do not know whether they have really accepted what you have stated. In fact, you may even have a exit test after the training, then perhaps everybody will listen to you properly and even perhaps answer the questions. But still, after this awareness training, there is always a need to convert this awareness into acceptance. Recently, we had this pledge document. One of the reasons why this kind of getting a written signed commitment from a person is that psychologically the person actually feels more obliged to do things which he has given in writing. Of course, if he has read it properly and understood it, if he has simply signed it, that is a different issue. So I feel that after creating the awareness, the next stage of implementation has to be the acceptance. This is applicable to the top management as well as to the workforce. So this converting awareness to commitment is actually a very difficult. This is the reason why I say that DPOs should know about behavioral training and related things, because the entire essence of motivation is converting a knowledge into something which I accept, believe, and try to do it. That is, internalization of the commitment is something which is part of this. Now, how do I bring about this change? Maybe an external consultant cannot easily do this. This is the reason why at least one person in the organization has to be part of this team, and maybe it's also a continuous exercise, not one this thing. There has to be a series of activities leading to this kind of acceptance. So this is the second point which I normally focus. Now this role identification, which has come as a new element, arises because we have been talking about this distributed responsibility as one of the important requirements of an effective data protection implementation. The idea is that GDPR expects that there has to be accountability. Therefore, we need a designated data protection officer so that externally he is the person who represents the organization, and that is required. There is no doubt that a person needs to be designated. But in an organization with hundreds and thousands of employees operating in multiple locations and different divisions, and each technology process is itself a complicated process. To understand what my Bangalore unit is doing, what my Pune unit is doing, that even for the DPO, it takes a lot of effort. Now people are talking of AI and other things. Even the people who are closest to the process may not know how the AI is functioning. So how will the DPO sitting somewhere else take the responsibility for the actions of all his people and say that he will be committed to answer the data protection authority? We never know that sometime in future the DPO may be even asked to share liability in case of an organization not fulfilling the obligations, but trying to put it into the public as if they are compliant or something like that. So data protection officers need some kind of support from the employees, and we have been telling that the distributed responsibility is the concept where every employee looks at his data domain, whatever is the data which he can access. Personal data. Let us look at personal data for the time being. Same thing can be extended to information security for non-personal data. Now, taking only personal data, if I am an employee, I have been given a laptop, I have been given access to one or two applications, then through those applications, I can go to a particular database and let us say I can have access to that personal data. Now, this domain of my computer, my ability to access one part of the database, I call that as a data domain which that particular person has got the control. Now, if something has to be compliant in that scenario, it is not fair that we expect the DPO to come and take care of it. In fact, the employee himself should take the responsibility for that data domain. This is the essence of distributed responsibility, that every employee is a DPO at his data domain. In fact, when we discussed the pseudonymization gateway concept, which I have discussed with many of you, perhaps most of you, we have discussed that there could be a role of a data custodian who is a pseudonymization gatekeeper. That is, every personal data which is entering the organization, before it is being released to the further process, is being pseudonymized, and the pseudonymization table is maintained by this pseudonymization gatekeeper, who is the one person in the organization who knows what is the real identity of most of these data subjects. Rest of the people will be only having access to pseudonymized data sets. And for this purpose, we have worked on a particular software which Guna was working along with our friend here. Of course, it is still not commercially perhaps ready, but the point is that out of these thousands of employees in an organization, only that gatekeeper, who may be one person or maybe a team of 2-3 persons, will be the person who has access to real identified personal data. Rest of the people are having access only to pseudonymized data. Therefore, the risk of any compromise at the secondary level, the possibility of harm is less. Because the harm is less, the risk of penalty, everything becomes substantially reduced. This pseudonymization internally need not necessarily be considered as an anonymization, because we are not anyway releasing it to a outside party who has a malicious intention of breaking the pseudonymization and finding out who is the real data holder. So it will be within the organization, and probably the possibility of people taking extra efforts to de-pseudonymize can be considered as non-existent, because earlier you were trusting them with fully identified data and asking them to process. If they were trusted for handling fully identified data, we can definitely trust them for handling pseudonymized data. So that person's role there is like a data gatekeeper with identity. Now, even otherwise, if you look at the process, I have suggested that we need to identify internally the roles as internal data controller and internal data processor. What I meant by this is that internal data controller is the person who actually determines the means and purpose of processing within the organization. And internal data processor is a person within the organization who is just a person who carries out the processing. So again, by dividing this into two categories, we are reducing the responsibility of the one set of people. Therefore, the responsibilities are lowest at the internal data processor. He has to just follow what instructions he receives as a desktop operator. Internal data controller is like the departmental head who determines how the process is to be done. And the data custodian or the pseudonymization gatekeeper is the person who really knows the identity. So these are different roles. And I want this role identification also to happen with the workforce. Each person should know what is his role. Then this distributed responsibility will have more meaning, because they will understand what is their role. So that is why I added this as one of the important segments of this implementation plan. Now, the another thing is the tools. Of course, tools is a compendium of everything else we are doing today, like the set of policies, all technology tools, which may be the anonymization tool, pseudonymization tool, maybe data leak prevention measures, consent tagging, discovery, personal data discovery tools, whatever technology tools you use, all that are tools which we are asking our employees to use. Now, if we want them to have an efficient data protection, as a management, it is our responsibility to give them the right kind of tools. So identifying the right tools and then making it available to our people is one of the responsibilities of the management. Similarly, writing the kind of policies as may be required and making everybody aware of the policies is also a tool for the workforce which we prepare. Besides this policies and technologies, some skill development training also we may give. This is different from the awareness training. Now, leadership related things, counseling, and how to handle crisis. These are all some skill development training which would help a person to handle the crisis. Just like you give a policy, just like you give a technology tool, also make him a better human being to handle the situation in the organization. So if you look at that kind of a requirement, the kind of training programs we give for say enhancement of the behavioral skills of a person, I call that also as a tool. So therefore, there are three kinds of tools: policies or legal technology tools and the behavioral kind of tools, 3 dimensions to various tools which we have to give to our people. Now, our PDP CSI framework, Personal Data Protection Compliance Standard of India, actually takes care of all these things. In fact, the reason why I thought of this 6-factor this thing was that when I was talking to some of the professionals recently on this implementation challenges, whatever they were suggesting as challenges, I felt they are already included in our PDP CSI framework. Maybe they are not aware of it because they have not studied it. And even our own members have not studied the PDP CSI. So in fact, I actually suggested to a group of IAPP team that you have a task force to look at this PDP CSI framework. I will present this PDP CSI framework. You please tell me what is good or bad about this PDP CSI framework, because we are saying that it is better than everything else. It's better than ISO 27701, etc. Not only because of cost, but it includes all those things and perhaps adds a few more things. Okay, this, as somebody who has created the framework, I can always say that my product is the best product. I have asked these people to actually take up the challenge of creating a special interest group or task force, and I will take the responsibility of explaining what is our concept of PDP CSI. Let them punch holes into it, because if they punch holes, then we can work on how to bridge those holes, and that is how we also want to improve. So I felt that a lot of questions which were there in their mind was already addressed by PDP CSI framework, and probably if it is known more intimately, then people will accept the utility of this. So these are the tools which I am talking of. Then the two other things are the normal carrot and stick kind of approach. We have to give them incentives to employees. Incentives need not necessarily be the salary and bonus or something like that, which contribute to the basic requirements. Recognition of some kind is also a kind of incentive. And the opportunity for self-growth. This is basically the 3 elements of the Maslow's hierarchy of motivational needs. Okay. This opportunity for self-growth is the self-actualization requirements. A person would feel happy that in a particular company he has got an opportunity to enhance his own skill and knowledge, and he may prefer that to another company where he may be asked to do some lower end work, but he is paid higher as a salary or something like that. So in incentivize any operation, we have to look at what could be the motivational requirement of the persons, and then accordingly provide that. We need to have a mix, and different people get motivated by different parts of the mix. But one thing we must remember is the motivational needs of a person are also dynamic. What motivates a person today, 6 months from now, it may not work. Okay. Now, for various reasons, because his attitude could have changed. That's why there was another motivational theory which identified certain aspects as motivators and certain other factors as hygiene factors. What that theory said was that there are certain things which, if it is not there, it will become a demotivator. But if it is there, it will not be a motivator. So there are certain things which will be a motivator if it is available. That is a positive thing. But certain other things are such that its absence will be a demotivator, but its presence will not be a motivator. Those are the things which we call as hygiene factor. And what happens is, due to the changing mental status of a person, what was motivational about a month back or 6 months back ceases to be that in the after some time. The classic example of that is last year you have given an increment of 10% to somebody. He was very, very happy with that. It was a motivator. The next 3 months, 6 months, he has done tremendous work. But afterwards, he settles down to this new salary, and gradually the euphoria of having had a bigger salary dies down. By the time the next assessment comes, if you just tell him that you will get whatever salary you got last year, obviously it doesn't motivate him. In fact, if increment is not there, it will become a demotivator. But you give him an increment, then unless that increment is huge, it may still not be a motivator. So this is the kind of understanding we need to have when we build at incentives. Mere financial incentives will not work. Now, sanctions, on the other hand, is the disciplinary proceedings which we take when a person actually has been non-compliant. Now, these sanctions again has to be proportionate and logical. So there could be disincentives for ignorance, which is the base thing. There could be disincentives for negligence, and there would be disincentives for malicious intention. There has to be a graded structure of punishments. In fact, in HIPAA, whenever I try to redesign the policy, I always try to link this disincentive, this thing to the sequence of the penalties which they have mentioned. So similarly, here also you cannot simply say that, okay, any kind of non-compliance, you will be fined 1,000 rupees, you will be losing one increment or something like that. It has to be proportionate to the actual whatever omission has been there. And another important thing for sanctions to work is it should be non-discretionary. What I mean by non-discretionary is the immediate boss should not have the ability to say, oh, he's a good worker, so we will not punish him. At the same time, he remains silent when a similar mistake is done by another person. This kind of discretion has to be removed, and that is why sanctions should be part of the HR policy. So these are things which we normally do, and I'm just trying to call the same thing and put it into a structure. Now, I have been telling that our PDP CMS has many elements which are taking care of this, probably because this has been in my mind for a long time. So if you look at our 50 model implementation specifications, which includes DTS measurement and also DTS indicators for individual departments, like how good is the management department, how good is the DPO, that kind of things is what our PDP CMS system can achieve. No other framework is able to do it. And those of you who have studied it, you know that we have divided the 50 implementation specifications into different responsibility centers. Management responsibilities is around 15, DPO responsibilities is around 9. Then we have got the legal responsibilities, HR responsibilities, which takes into account the work from remote policy, data asset responsibility, which is required for data particular distributed responsibility. Because when you have a job specification itself, you must tell there that you have responsibility for security. Okay. And similarly, in the case of legal responsibilities, grievance redressal to be added. These are all things which may not be prevalent in every other framework, but we have found it necessary because the Indian data protection system makes it mandatory. Other things about what could be the policy for notice and consent, etc., are there in the DPO responsibilities, including the cross-border thing, legitimate interest. These are all exclusive to the particular jurisdiction. In fact, if you look at our management, this thing, we have stated that there should be a senior executive coordination policy. There has to be a regulatory agency relationship management policy, business acceptance policy, business associate relationship policy. These are all things which are normally not highlighted in a normal, say, framework. We have found it essential. And even the whistleblower system, we have called it as augmented whistleblower system, because we are not restricting the whistleblower system only to the employees. Even the so-called bug bounty program is part of the augmented whistleblower system, because after all, bug bounty is nothing but whistleblowing. So we have already included several aspects of data governance as part of the PDP CMS. It falls into one of these six categories. And of course, the IT responsibilities are always there. These are the things which everybody is familiar, because every other framework provides adequate coverage to the IT responsibilities. So I feel that this sort of an approach, at least I have found it easy to be used in a practical scenario. I would like to hear from you how you feel about having a kind of approach like this. Now, the floor is open for discussions.